guys. We are Team 2. We are part of Champion Labs and working on their project for a database. I'm Hans Lakenar, and I was in charge of the backend documentation.
I'm Joshua Jones. I'm a developer.
I'm Austin Garrison. I did front end documentation and kept track of deadlines.
I'm Peyton Sharp. I was one of the developers.
And I'm Nick Scheller, and I worked on front end documentation as well as I was in charge with the communication between our group and our client. Our client, Champion Labs, is located in Albion, Illinois, and is a global leading manufacturing company. They build oil, air, and transmission filters for automotive companies like General Motors, Mopar, Valvoline, and many more. They also perform tests on these filters for quality assurance before producing them in large quantities. The problem they are having is with their database management system, Lotus Approach. Lotus Approach was created by IBM in 1994, and their last stable software update was in 2008. The program has slowly started to lose functionality over the years and has been slowing down their Champion Labs' testing procedures. With the incompatibility with Windows 10 and Microsoft dropping support for Windows 7, Champion Labs was looking for a modern solution.
When meeting with our client, we discussed additional functionality and established baseline expectations for a replacement program. First off, our program needed to be able to read and store values into a database in real time, meaning that the request form and the data grid views are changing in response to updates on other machines running the same program. On the same token, our program needed to support multiple lab techs using the program at the same time. The ability to search using multiple parameters was important as well. For example, if a lab tech needed to view a test form that they filled out a few weeks ago, they can search using their name and a date range. Champion Labs also wanted the ability to print off or email specific forms directly from our program, which Lotus Approach used to be able to do, but stopped working over the years. In terms of non-functional requirements, our client really wanted to keep the interface design as close to Lotus Approach as possible for ease of use on the lab techs. Additionally, we are providing back-end documentation for their IT personnel. Essentially, we are making a newer and better version of Lotus Approach. As far as our project plan goes, we took an agile development route. We split out into two main subgroups. Nick and I largely worked on the business end and developed documentation. Our development team consisted of Peyton, Josh, and Hans worked and contributed to both groups as our team lead. Throughout this project, our developers have communicated and sorted their tasks using Trello. As you can see in this photo, they utilized colored labels which indicated priority, and they sorted them into about 6 different lists. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Josh.
For this tool, we use Microsoft's Visual Studio and C Sharp. We chose this not only for familiarity, but because Windows Forms gave us a lot of functionality we would otherwise have to make ourselves. The data grid view was the most important of these features and afforded us a head start on the application. We wrote the database in Microsoft SQL being hosted on Azure. This was initially done for testing, but might end up as our recommendation to the client, but it doesn't require us to be on site to set up and is affordable. Ideally, we'd like to set it up on their current existing SQL servers, but it's nice to have a backup plan. Most of what separated this from a simple data tool application was the client's request for most things to stay the same, so that they could cut down on training time. The request form is a near perfect recreation of their original, while the other forms have been slightly modified. We made many modifications to keep the number of SQL queries to a minimum. For example, we kept the database loaded in memory, and every few seconds the application queries a field in the database we use to keep track of changes. So instead of getting the whole database every few seconds, we just receive a few characters. And because of how many controls there are, and there are a lot of them, we needed to be able to read and write to them generically without having to explicitly reference them. This required a tagging system on each control that held information like its name in the database, the name that we wanted to be on the header, the database table, among others.
This is the request form. This is the form that we were able to recreate perfectly. And as you can see on it, there is a bunch of controls. Every text box in the middle has to be read and stored, and it's the form they'll see most often, so we spent the most time developing it. Next slide. This is the data grid view, which we're using to emulate what used to be their database view. And this will allow them to sort it, filter it, and they can sort each column by ascending and descending. This is us adding a new record, which we will demo at the end. And this is us editing a record. You can select it in the data grid view and edit it there, or go back to the request page and edit it on that, and it'll save it, and we'll also demo that at the end.
And in accordance with the application that we're going to be giving them, Chamption Labs also wants some documentation for any changes that have happened, both for the user or for the backend. The big reason behind this is whenever they start taking over maintenance-wise, IT department wants to have something as kind of like a stepping stone for it. So most of the time, the IT department is going to be consulting this. This backend documentation basically became a small data dictionary covering all the code in there, as well as kind of expanding on what each function or each variable is doing. With that as well, we also have a CRUD matrix as well, and this is just showing what the user and the admin are allowed to do and who has privileges where. So the backend documentation, the data dictionary that took up kind of most of a lot of that portion, this is split up into 4 columns. The function class is just kind of describing either the class or the form or whichever CS file it's going through. The values and the internal methods, so any of the variables that are put in there, as well as any internal methods that might get called or anything that goes into it, and the definition on the side. So some of these might be clumped together, just describing what that particular data is doing, as well as it may also describe if we're going to be going into a different function or to a different for loop. And the optional one of the references is any of the internal methods that actually get called, and whenever they're getting called, for them to be able to jump down to it. So the CRUD matrix, this one that we have just listed out right now, is just showing what we think the user and the admin are going to be allowed to do. So for example, when it comes to creating a new entry, the user is allowed to create and they're allowed to read it, but the admin will be allowed to create, read, update, and delete that one. As well as when it's coming to deleting from the database, the user is only allowed to read that one, where the admin will be allowed to create, read, update, or delete from there. And then the test case scenarios that we had coming up, one was testing on a slow PC with about 1 GB of RAM just to see how well it worked on that. We also saw when the PC would go into sleep mode how the application would function with that. We also tested the timing on separate clients whenever we would make a real-time update to see how long it took to respond on the other client. And we also did some small SQL injection just to see if it would do anything to the program. And then with the feature comparison on the Lotus approach, they only had 2 things that actually was part of it once we got a chance to look at their system, where we are at least trying to capture a couple things that they don't have. For example, on the operational requirements, multiple users are able to see it, as well as it's going to have easier maintainability and printability. On performance requirements with stability, we also have the speed and real-time changes that we were able to see whenever we were doing testing on multiple clients. And then with the other requirements we have a customized backend documentation versus what we found on Lotus was just a general documentation that didn't necessarily reference what they were working with. And then from the business impact from this, obviously Chamption Labs gets a more stable SQL environment to where there's plenty more documentation on it, and they're actually going to be able to maintain and scale it up as the years come up to where there's not a whole lot of chance for the support to be ending versus what they have with Lotus on that. And with the way that we've developed the application, they can actually cut down on training, and they also have a back-end documentation for people to get a glimpse of what the code is going to be in the back. And from the student impact, we got a chance to kind of see where everybody's strengths were in this whole project as we were going through, where we kind of had like 2 groups, and we have one person that was tied in the middle of it, and everybody was able to work and see their strengths and be able to present a great product. And then this is just a short demo of the video that we just went ahead and recorded, so we'll go ahead and play it. I don't know if the sound is going to come through for you guys though. So
There is not sound.
are you guys able to hear it?
No.
No.
Can you guys hear it or not?
Hans,
No.
if you go up to the top, where the options are for screen share, there's an option to share computer sound. You'll have to enable that.
Said share. Oh, okay. I see it. Okay. Now tell me if you guys can hear it.
So you
And
go up
make
here,
sure the volume's
click
up.
on new record.
Yep.
You guys can
And
hear
it'll
it.
automatically take you back over here to the request tab. So for example, this is test number 41005. That's the newest one we have. Request date pops up for the date currently, and the due date is always moved a month after whatever the request date is for popping up. So we'll just go ahead and fill in a couple of values. And then if we come over back to the data tab, you'll see that what we had entered into it actually does get entered in. So you see how it all updates there. We can also change the information that comes up here as well. So for example, if we change the name, we just change it to John Smith. Go ahead and hit enter. It should go ahead and update over here on the request tab for us. As we go back over and you see that requested by John Smith, that is updated for there. As well as, depending on what information we put into it, whatever we check over here, it should populate into whichever form that they're going to be working on, whatever tests they're wanting to do. So one of the ones that they most frequently use is the media migration. So if we go back over here to the request, and we go over here, and we'll check it for C, for being complete. Then we enter in the fluid, so 16. Then we'll just put a number for the temperature. And then once that's all entered in, it should go ahead and show up in media migration. So let's go over here. And everything we've entered in from the request tab, as well as what we had over there for the media migration, it went ahead and filled everything in for it.
And then from that, if you guys have any questions or any comments, we're open to the floor.